Here we go for the day. Oh, yeah. Let's find if this thing is working. I believe that it is. Hello. Why am I a little quiet? Am I a little quiet? Let's find out if I'm a little quiet. Hang on. I promise you, I'm coming. I promise you, I am coming. I'm coming around the mountain when I come. He'll be coming around the mountain. He'll be coming around the mountain. Yeah, that's a little low. Let's bump that up a bit more. Yeah, there we go. I like that. Let's switch back over to here. And I will say, good morning. Hi. Welcome to Podcast Pontifications. I'm Evo Terra, and I am about to record an episode of my podcast. It's called Podcast Pontifications. It's all about the future and present of podcasting and ways we can make podcasting better. Today, the topic is going to be, gotta get myself situated in my chair, can you podcast without reliable analytics? At least that's the title, and that is also the topic. Topic will be podcasting in a post-IP address world. Oh, scary, don't run away. I promise I'll make this very simple. And by the way, I have good news. Now, if you are just now joining me for the first time ever, this is a live recording of the show. This is not the show itself. I just jump on the internets. Hi, Kevin. So I can say hi to Kevin. Specifically, the only reason I do the podcast as this live video, the reason I let you see the behind-the-scenes thing is so I can say good morning to Kevin Patton. That's it. And other people who also like to watch this on Twitter, on YouTube, on LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook. There you go. All the other places where this is actually published. So the real live program actually will go live at 10 o'clock Phoenix time, which is a little after 7 a.m. Phoenix time right now. So this is the beginning. We will then massage all of this stuff into an audio file you can listen to, as well as an article that I rewrite every single day. Oh, someone just told me I'm a handsome devil. Why, thank you, LinkedIn user, for telling me I'm a handsome devil. I appreciate that. So I was hoping today to also stream into the advancing podcasting community that we've set up. I've got 100 or so people in the advancing podcasting community, people like yourself, advancing podcasting at XYZ. I know you hear the ad for those who've watched before every single time it plays, and yes, I am going to change out the ad at the beginning of the month. But my plan is to stream it in there. My plan was today to stream the show in there so that people could watch as I do it. I even got up 15 minutes early to make sure everything was all situated. But, habits, man. And also there's the old adage that work expands to fit the time allotted for it. Well, I looked up and was like, oh, you have 5 minutes before you have to turn on the live stream. So I will not be live streaming today into the community, but I plan on it tomorrow. I'm going to get everything set up ahead of time. It's a little weird, a little wonky how I get streaming into that Discord server, but that is the plan. So again, if you're watching on LinkedIn or YouTube or Twitter or Facebook, great. Keep doing that. But if you'd prefer, you can hop into the advancing podcasting community every morning, because that's my next setup will be here. Let's get it all done so you can watch in there. Not sure what sort of comments and chatting. I am assuming some, because it is Discord. It's all about chatting and stuff. So anyhow, we'll get that figured out. But today we're getting into the issue of reliability and metrics and what that means to podcasting, basically when IP addresses go away, because they're going away. Yeah. All right. So if all of that is said and done, let me do my adjusting. I think I am sufficiently warmed up of the vocal cords here. Push that all over the side. I like to read the cold open before the actual show begins, so I will do that. Once I clear my throat about 1,000 times and take another drink. All right. Here we go. Cold open. If reactions to... Try that again. If reactions to very real privacy concerns may remove... No. Reactions... Oh, not may removing. See, this is why I read that loud. If reactions to very real privacy concerns remove our one way to track downloads, it'll wreck the podcasting industry. It'll wreck the podcast advertising industry. There we go. But what about about everyday podcasters who don't rely on impression-based ad sales. Yes, now that I have all of that done the way I want it, written the way I want it, I can actually record. All right, let's do this. Oh, you know what? Before the air conditioner kicks on, turn off the air conditioner, Evo. Just set up a routine where I can say, hey, Google, turn off the AC. Oh, I wonder if I can do that. Well, I'm not going to try that right now. That's something else to play with later. All right, there we go. And then I should say, hey, Eva, remind me to turn the AC back on because your wife will be upset with you if you don't. Yes, she will. All right, here we go. If reactions to very real privacy concerns remove our one way to track downloads, it'll wreck the podcast advertising industry. But what about everyday podcasters who don't rely on impression-based ad sales? Hello and welcome to another Podcast Pontifications with me, Evo Terra. We need to talk about IP addresses, but don't worry, this is not a technical conversation. You're a podcaster, not a developer. Or maybe you're both, I don't really know, but for right now, I'm talking to you as a podcaster. So as long as you can spell IP, this episode is for you. Let me explain just for a second. I got an analogy to explain what an IP address is. Think of an IP address as if it was a blind dog whose job is to bark every time a new visitor comes into the shop. I know that's kind of weird, but a blind dog that barks when new people come into the shop is the best way I can think of to describe IP addresses. Now, this dog sits by the door, and he can hear people come in. He knows when the door is open. He can hear the footsteps around him, but he can't actually see the people. That dog is using smell, and when he recognizes a new smell of a new person, he barks. Now, some people smell alike. Maybe they're in the same family. So he wouldn't know to bark even though 3 or 4 come in smelling exactly the same. Or maybe they all rode together on a giant tour bus for hours on end and they all smell the same. He's only going to bark once when he hears that smell. When he smells those people. Now, of course, the blind counting dog gets this wrong a lot, but at least directionally, it's right. Now, losing IP address in this same, stick with the metaphor for a minute, would be like all of those people suddenly having no scent. That dog can still hear people when they come into the shop, but now has no way to discern whether they're going in or they're going out, or the same family, or they're from the same bus. So all I can do is bark every time he hears a footstep go past him, and he's going to bark a lot more than he used to because he can no longer discern the differences between these people. Losing IP address in podcasting is kind of the same thing. Your podcast media hosting company will still continue to count traffic, downloads, if you will. They'll even know which app made the request for your episode file, whether that's a listening app itself or a browser, maybe email, whatever. But your hosting company isn't going to know what not to count or what accesses they should group together as one thing because they've lost the IP address. We've lost that scent for our barking, counting dog. Now, naturally, the entire podcast ad industry is rather nervous about this very real possibility of us losing IP addresses. The only way we have to measure right now, which is the IAB, the Internet Advertising Bureau's podcasting standard, that requires IP addresses to fingerprint, even though I shouldn't use the word fingerprint because it's not that identifying, but nonetheless, they reuse that IP address to filter out repeated visits from the same household, all sorts of things, so they can get a much more accurate number of downloads. And the IP address is critical for doing that. Just like our blind counting dog above, they get this wrong a lot, but at least it's directionally right. So we know how our podcast is growing, how it's comparing to other shows in the industry. Okay, leaving the metaphor aside for now, in Sounds Profitable, the podcast ad tech newsletter, last week, Brian posted an article called Who Wins When IP Addresses Disappear? And it paints a very dire picture. what's going to happen to the podcast ad industry, and I highly recommend that you read it. It will, of course, be linked in the show notes. But what about podcasters, perhaps like you, who do not sell ads on a per-impression basis? That's the vast majority. I mean, the vast majority of podcasters, by the way. It's even me. Well, we're also reliant on IP addresses to give us those download numbers, but we don't sell those download numbers. Remember that. Those download numbers we use are great, but remember, if IP addresses are now suddenly lose their scent or genericized, we're not going to have a standard way of figuring out how many people are listening, or perhaps just downloading, our podcast episodes. So what happens? What happens when you and me have no idea how many people are downloading your show or my show? Well, honestly, I don't really think all that much changes. Now, beyond the strum and drang, of which, by the way, is going to be extremely bad, I think podcasting will survive this. Hobbyists don't really care about accurate downloads. They just want to know if someone on the other end is listening, and ideally if those numbers are going up. And remember, the hosting providers will still be able to provide counts of activity, just much less precise than they are today, which is already not very precise. And then the influencers, podcasters who use their podcast as an influencer platform, I think they'll adapt really quickly. Influencers are fantastic at spinning disparate follower numbers and likes and other sorts of engagement to roll that up into an audience, a size of an audience. And they can even rely on their other properties to show evidence of their efficacy of what's happening on their podcast to the brands they work with. They'll be fine. Business podcasters, sure, they want people to listen to their podcast, but they care much more about how the podcast impacts their bottom line. So assuming they're tracking things that really matter to them, like meetings scheduled or other business outcomes that their podcast is set up to drive, they'll be fine. And you know what? I'm pretty confident that podcast advertising will survive this too. If I learned one thing in my 20-ish years of running digital advertising agencies and leading marketing teams, it's that the ad tech industry is extremely resilient. There's already talk of something called PETs, privacy enhancing technologies that will, amongst other things, allow for even more accurate tabulation of podcast accesses, but without, or so the theory goes, the leaky privacy issues that come native to IP addresses. And also keep this in mind. The biggest podcast advertisers are still direct response advertisers. Those are proven effective only when someone uses the coupon code or discount code at checkout. Those advertisers pay for ads on a CPM model, yes, but they're tracking on an ROAS, return on ad spend, or ROI, return on investment. That's how they're tracking. Ad volume and impressions are just outputs, not business outcomes. So I'm confident they'll also be able to adapt. Now let me be clear. If we lose IP addresses, or if they become less reliable, which is increasingly likely and on a long enough time scale, inevitable, it'll cause massive upheaval. Livelihoods will be seriously impacted, with many ruined. Lots of businesses models will go belly up. And yes, that includes some in podcasting. But after that happens, I believe podcasting will be fine and will survive. Now, one thing that might offset the impact is this concept of value for value. It's stupidly early in the process right now, but it's directionally interesting. Apps like Podfriend, Fountain, Podverse, and many more are in fact seeing increased revenues flowing from creators to listeners, other way around, to creators from listeners who derive value from their work. Again, it's stupidly early and it's so complicated right now, but I'm paying attention to it. You probably should as well. So if you got a sigh of relief out of this episode, hit the boost button if, in fact, you are using a value for value-enabled podcast listening app. And if you're not using one, well, you can always hit up buymeacoffee.com/evoterra and buy me a virtual coffee. That's it. I shall be back tomorrow with yet another podcast, Pontifications. Cheers. Audio recording is off. Video recording is off. Goodness, I knew that was going to go long. That was almost 10 minutes of just on that, and I shortened it. Yes, I did. All right. So thank you very much for watching. If you are just now tuning in, you missed it. Sure, you could back up 15 minutes and 30 seconds to watch the beginning of the live stream if you want. Knock yourself out. But I also offer you a better suggestion than that. If you wait around for 2 hours and 46 minutes, you will have the full episode. But I mean wait around here. Right now, go to podcastpontifications.com. Click that button that says subscribe and drop your email address in. You'll get an email sent to you at 10 o'clock this morning that shows you the link to the audio file if you want to listen to it and the full article I'm about to rewrite. I'll take every word that tumbled forth from my face and rearrange them on paper, electronic paper, so that they read nicely. I'm doing that as soon as I get off here. And all of that's posted at Podcast Pontifications and sent out to everybody who subscribed to the newsletter at 10 o'clock this morning. Or if you want, just subscribe to the show or follow the show in whatever podcast app you want to use. As I mentioned, Podfriend, Fountain, Podverse, good reason to start using these new value-for-value-enabled apps. I'm playing around with them. Right, so that's how you can do it. Get the show. Thank you very much. Tomorrow we'll do this again as I am wont to do. So, see you then. Thanks for watching. Have a lovely rest of your Tuesday, and bye-bye.